We're going to want lube along the pin and inside of the roller so that as this spins, as the chain is bending, there's a lot of lubrication there. What's up, guys? This is Levi again, the technical director for Berkshire Bike and Board, and today we're here to talk about chain lube. There's a lot of different opinions out there and types of chain lube, and today we're just going to keep it simple. We're going to go through what I like to do on my personal bike and the bikes that we see here in the shop. For today's video, we're just going to talk about bottled chain lube, and within that there's a couple different kinds. So you can see here we have a dry lube and a wet lube, and then this is the lube that I actually use and the lube that we use in the shop. This is just kind of an all-purpose lube. The one thing that I do want to make clear is that any lube we're using on our bikes here is a bicycle-specific lube. So if you have a penetrating lubricant, a bottle of WD-40 in your garage, anything along those lines, maybe some chainsaw oil, unfortunately it doesn't really tick the boxes that we need for bicycle chain lube. The main properties that differentiates a all-purpose lubricant and a bicycle-specific lubricant is that this lube is going to go on the chain and it's going to do a good job of not attracting a lot of grit and grime that's going to stick to the chain. The more grit and grime we have on there, the faster things wear out, the dirtier the chain gets, and that's something we definitely want to avoid. The main question here, what we're trying to address, is why do we need to lube our chain? And with any moving part, right, lubricant is something that's going to get in there and keep everything moving as freely as possible. So you can see we have a link here, we have a link here, and on the inside this is the pin that's going to connect the two sides of the chain. This here is the roller, and as you can imagine, you know, this is what one side of a chain looks like as it's moving. So when you take a look in here, these two sides of the chain are constantly rubbing up against each other. In addition to that, we have this roller here, and this keeps the two sides of the chain spaced apart. There's always going to be friction in there. So the less friction that we can have in this system, the smoother your bike's going to feel and the more efficient the chain's going to work. It definitely can get down to some pretty surprising numbers of power sappage as you let your chain get dirtier and dirtier. So friction is definitely going to be one of the main things. Related to that is going to be chain wear. So the more friction we have, it means the more metal on metal that we have and the faster these parts are wearing out. The faster a chain wears out, as it's touching all the teeth on these gears and on the chainring up front, it's going to wear those teeth out as well. So the more often and the more thoroughly that we clean and lube our chain, the longer everything's going to kind of last. The third part of that, as you can probably see on this bike here, is there's a little bit of rust and corrosion built up on the chain, and chain lube does a great job of just kind of putting a protective layer over that chain. Here at Berkshire Bike and Board, we also like to think of the chain lubing process as a step in cleaning the chain. So the more that we clean the chain, again, the cleaner it's going to ride, the freer everything's going to run. And lastly but not least, as we are shifting through our gears, if our chain is full of gunk or is a little bit stiff or corroded, you're not going to get those nice crisp shifts or that nice smooth engagement. So just to recap real quick, we got friction, that's probably the main one, cleanliness, preventing wear, and shift smoothing. Those are going to be the main benefits of chain lube. All right, before we get any further in this video, I just want to talk about what you actually need for this process. So this is one of the more simple forms of bike maintenance, probably just after inflating your tires. The only things that you're going to need is a bottle of chain lube and a rag. And then if you have a bicycle stand, it does help, but it's not completely necessary. Any multi-purpose lubricant, WD-40. Oh, good. We have a wet lube and a dry lube here. There's a few minor differences. It's not necessarily night and day, but let's start with the wet lube. This is going to go on your chain just a little bit thicker. This is probably the lube that you're going to want to use if you're riding a mountain bike, a gravel bike, if it's raining out. This is probably, if you're just going to have one type of lube, this is the one that I would recommend. The wet lube is going to last a little bit longer, especially in moist conditions. The one downside to that is it does go on a little bit thicker, so it does kind of build up a little bit of grit and grime a little bit faster. If you're staying up on top of lubing it and cleaning your chain, not really an issue. The dry lube is a better performing lube. There's a little bit less friction in the system when you're using a dry lube. The other benefit to this is that it does tend to stay a little bit cleaner, so it's not going to attract that grit and grime that I keep talking about. But you are going to have to put it on a bit more often, as it's not going to last as long. This is probably your midsummer, road bike. You're going to put this on before every ride. How often do we want to lube our chain, or how do we know when it's time that we need to lube our chain? One of the first telltale signs is if you're riding your bike and your chain is making a squeaking or a kind of reverberating noise, it's definitely time to lube your chain. If you feel like your shifting is a little bit clunky, that's definitely a sign as well. It's not always going to fix that, but I like to make sure the chain's properly lubed before I make any sort of adjustments to anything else. Sometimes a fresh lube will kind of take care of that. It's subtle, but if you're feeling that there's a little bit of resistance while you're pedaling, that's definitely another sign. Outside of that, really the best way to keep track is either by time or by mileage. The tricky thing here is that it's completely condition dependent. So if you go out, it's November, you're riding your mountain bike, it's rainy, it's muddy, that ride is probably gonna, all that water and grit splashing up there is probably gonna necessitate a lube when you get back from your ride. And again, if you're out in the summer, it's dry, you're on nice clean roads, that lube might last a little bit longer. What I do have to say about this is that as long as you're using the proper technique, I don't really think that you can do this too often. Again, I do wanna make sure that catch is noted that you have to use the proper technique to make sure that you don't get a buildup of lube. A little bit of a side note here, whenever you're using any types of lubes, whether aerosol, chain lube, anything like that, we definitely want to make sure that we stay away from any braking surfaces. So on a rim brake bike, not the end of the world if you get it on there, but you do want to avoid the braking surface. On a disc brake bike, it's a bit more important that we don't contaminate that pad or rotor with the chain lube. So if you look at this chain here, you can see, there's a bit of a grit and grime on there. And like I said, I like to think of the lubing process and the cleaning process, somewhat as one. We're lucky enough to have a stand here. I'll circle back on how to do this without a stand. The process is going to be the same. We're just not going to have the luxury of being level with the bike. It's very simple. So open the lube. I always like to lube on the inside of the chain. As it kind of goes around, it naturally kind of spreads that lube out towards the outside and through the chain. I'm very gently going to let it drip, and I'm just going to slowly rotate the chain backwards. I can see there's a constant stream of lube coming out of here, and I'm just going to go around the chain once or twice. If the chain is dirty, I will add a little bit more lube than I normally would, just to kind of help get in there and break up some of that grit and grime. We've got a nice layer of lube on the chain. The next thing that I'm going to want to do here is just pedal through the gears and kind of work that lube into all the different points of the chain. The next step is going to be wiping the chain down. And this is, in my opinion, the most important step and probably the most often missed step. All this lube on the outside of the chain, I'll show you guys in a second here exactly where we want that lube to go. Now that we've pedaled through, I'm going to take my rag and I'm just going to kind of hold it around the chain, come up from the bottom, and I'm just going to pedal through. And I want to get as much lube as I can off of the outside of the chain where we don't need it as I can, and get that lube on the inside where we do need it. This is also going to be the step here where we're cleaning the chain. So as I mentioned, this chain was a bit dirty. I put a bit extra lube on there, and that kind of broke some of that grit and grime down. And now we're just kind of cleaning it up. And you can go, in both directions, and you can see all the dirt we've gotten off. You can kind of manipulate where you're holding the chain, holding onto it to try to get a little bit, get in some of those angles and whatnot. I'm holding the top and the bottom, side to side. Keep going. So this part is super important. We want to get all of that lube off the outside of the chain. Another tip here, you can hold on the chain here and you can pedal the bike backwards, and it'll just kind of automatically pull that chain through. This is a rough chain. It's not in the best shape, but if I were to do that over the next couple of rides and just continuously work that lube in, wipe it off, we would just kind of see the cleanliness and the condition of some of the surface rust on this chain improve. As mentioned, where that chain lube goes is extremely important. So we have the prop, we have the chain. As I split this chain here, you can kind of see there's this gap in between the links. Now on a bike, it's going to be really small, but again, this is where the friction is. We definitely want some lube in there. And then again, as we look at the chain from this angle, the roller, we're going to want lube along the pin and inside of the roller, so that as this spins, as the chain is bending, there's a lot of lubrication there. Those are really the only places that we want lube to be on the chain. And the reason for that is this section here on the outside of the link is not ever having any friction right here. If there's lube here, it's not doing us any benefits, and all that it's doing is we're going down the road, is it's picking up the grit and grime. That's just going to cause friction down the road. So again, not everyone has the luxury of the stand, or maybe you just showed up to the trailhead with your new mountain bike and you forgot to lube it before you left the house. But it's the exact same process. Luckily, we can spin this chain backwards, and we just do it the exact same way that we would have in the air. Sweet, thanks for tuning in. As always, there's endless amounts of time we can spend on this thing, but you know, I have fun kind of nerding out on this stuff. So if you guys have any questions or comments, you know, feel free to leave them down below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. We want to keep this going, and we want to keep getting into deeper and deeper topics. Thanks.